Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Grant Cameron. First, a couple of announcements. Our website is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. This is where you find some of your favorite podcasts featured, like Raised by Giants, What the Frick Live, Understanding Propaganda, Day Zero, Quantum Guide Show, and many more. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Odyssey, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. The social media is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rokfin is where you get our premium content. You also get all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin with a premium account. Just go to rokfin.com/FKN+. That's ROKFIN.com/FKN+, or click that link in the description. Like I said, all those links are right there in the description. Today I want to welcome back to the show Grant Cameron. He is an author, lecturer, and researcher who has been involved with ufology since 1975 after his own personal sightings. He has made many trips to the National Archives and most of the various presidential archives looking for presidential UFO material. He has a collection of every UFO document released by presidential libraries, and most of his research can be found at presidentialufo.com. Mr. Cameron, welcome back. How you doing?
Well, thanks for your interest, and thanks. I'm glad to be back. It's I got some new stuff, so we should have a good show.
Oh, yes. Excellent. I've been looking forward to this. It's been a while, and a lot has changed within the global consciousness surrounding the UFO phenomenon. And for me, some of the most profound revelations have come from amazing researchers like yourself that look beyond the nuts and bolts understanding and take deep dives into the connections between our consciousness and what we understand as contact, and as well as actually connecting UFOs to people's personal experiences, which I believe is another key aspect to try and understand here. This phenomenon is like a never-ending onion that we're trying to peel through, and it just gets weirder and more difficult to understand the deeper we go. I can't wait to get into this. We're also going to get into your book, UFO Sky Pilots, which has incredible revelations from experiencers of not only contact, but supposedly piloting UFOs. So that's great. It's been a while since you've been on, though. Just remind the audience a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, I had my beginning started in 1975. I was following a flap of UFO sightings in Carmen, Manitoba, Canada. Had no interest in UFOs. Went out only because the local TV station had gotten a film of this thing jumping off the ground. And decided we'd go see what everybody's looking at, and never expected anything to happen. An hour after we were there, ready to go home, this thing flew right in front of the car, and it was not a light in the sky. It was an object down pretty close. I had 5 close-up sort of sightings in the year and a half that I went and I was gathering everybody's sightings. And at the end of all that, the local publisher, after many rejections from various publishers in Toronto, Canada, said to me, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And I was just totally shocked that she had no interest in these sightings that these people had had. And so I just had the second night I had been out there, I saw this thing. It came right at me, and then it made this turn, and then it flew off into the northeast. And years later, I thought, why did it fly at me? Why didn't it just go from the west to the northeast? And it came right at me. It was like it was intended for me to get involved. It came at me, and then it made this turn and just flew off. And as it was flying off, I said, like, what's it doing in Carmen? It's like, there's nothing here. Like, what's going on? Like, what's this thing? And where is it? And I knew I wasn't, the smartest guy to figure this thing out, but I figured somebody had to know what was going on. So I started sort of a lifetime of chasing people who I figured had the information that they might leak out or they might talk about it. And it didn't matter whether I believed their political views or what they thought about UFOs or whatever. I just knew that they were in a position to know, and I listened very carefully. And that included all the presidents. I chased around all the presidents, went to the presidential archives. I figured this is the most powerful guy in the world. He's got to know what's going on. I checked what the Canadian government was doing. And then in 2012, I have the download experience that changes everything. And it basically says, not directly, but that question you asked in 1975, what's going on here? And it basically put 3 pieces of the puzzle all together in my head at the same time that I'd already knew. I knew these things. I just put the pieces together, and I went, oh, that's it. And it was like consciousness, but I really didn't know as I make a joke, at that time I couldn't have spelled consciousness and couldn't have cared less. Um, I really didn't know what they meant by consciousness, except that it had to do something with ESP. And so I started to search, and then I realized it was this higher aspect of consciousness, the, sort of what is consciousness, non-local consciousness, all this kind of stuff. And I started this pursuit of changing my view. And a lot of people in the UFO community sort of cut me off. They just sort of said, Cameron's lost his mind. He's on this consciousness thing. And now it's a big buzzword. Everybody's come to Jesus and they're all, talking about consciousness, even though a lot of them don't understand what they're talking about. And so I started this pursuit, and then I had the other thing to fill it in. I had this experience in 2017, was another sort of download experience where I was walking. There's different modalities. I wrote a book called Contact Modalities. There's different modalities that people use to get into what I call the field. All the information is in the field. And you can use meditation, you can use hypnosis, you can use psychedelics, you can use injury, near-death experience, and all these different things will put you in the field where suddenly you've got this information, you got this revelation, and you can, if you're lucky, you can bring it back to your regular world. And I had one, and it basically started to give me these things. Is it this or is it this? And it was basically saying, not only is what you've got wrong, it's exactly the opposite of what you think it is. So it basically said, if the world is made out of little nuts and bolts, that's one world with certain rules and regulations. But the world's made out of consciousness. That's a completely different world, and all the rules are going to change. Is it one life? If it's one life, well, then that's one world. But if it's multiple lives, everything's going to change. And it was this thing, and it was like this and this and this. And I knew it was important. And that's the thing about I try to get across. Anybody who hasn't had one of these sort of revelatory experiences won't understand the fact that people will describe, I knew this was right. And so I knew this was actually I didn't have to check this. I got this piece of paper. It was cold out, took my glove off, and I'm writing this stuff down. And then it sort of, after about 14 or 15 of these things, it sort of tailed off, and I sort of kept walking. And then about maybe 2 minutes later, started again, and I got the pen out and I started writing this stuff down again. And I haven't done that book, but there was about 24 things that it sort of gave me. But it was this sort of idea that, and I did a book on psychedelics. I did 25 high dose sessions with psychedelics. And in there, the main focus for me was ego. They were coming after me for the ego. They said, you think you know what's going on? You haven't got a clue what's going on. And it was this, and it just hammering and hammering. And then I remember the one time I was really upset. They kept hammering me on this ego thing. And then I said to them, okay, so I just want to know what's going on. Like, so what the hell's going on? And then this voice says to me, we don't know either. And I went, what? You don't know? What? I was just furious. And I guess it was sort of, I was talking to a level just above me. And it's sort of like, what's at your level and below you, but you don't know what's above you. And that's what happens with the UFO experience, I've found, is that the deeper you get into it, the more weird it gets, the more, as Jacques Vallée says, the more absurd it gets. And it starts not to make any sense. And then you start getting stuff like this latest book, UFO Sky Pilots, where people describe, oh, I touched this pad, I became one with the craft is alive, and suddenly I could see in 360 degrees. I could see everywhere, all around me, and up, down, and around. And I thought, that is just bizarre. I mean, how do you figure that? Or people that would describe that they went inside the craft, and it was a normal sized craft. They went inside the craft, it was the size of a football stadium inside. And a lot of people describe this. And in fact, there's even a case I've just come across from Len Stringfield, who I knew at the time. He was the guy, he was sort of famous for being the guy who they were leaking all the material on alien autopsies and crashes and all this kind of stuff. And he had 200 to 300 people come to him about leaking stories about alien autopsies and crashes and recoveries and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going like, I've never had anybody come to me. Not one. He had 300. So what's that say? It says that they're feeding him. But he had a case, 1973. He wrote it up. There was a guy, he was a photographer out of Hawaii. He was flown to Norton Air Force Base in California, and then was driven in a car 2 hours, came to this hangar, and inside the hangar there was a crane that had a netting hanging from the crane, and inside the netting was this 30-foot wide flying saucer, and there was the opening, there was sort of an opening, a door there, and his job was to film the panels. So people will describe these symbols on the panels. And in the book Sky Pilots, I actually have Chris Bledsoe. He sees the panels, and I said, can you draw the panels? So he draws the panels, one of the panels for me with these symbols on them. And so that was his job, was to film these symbols on these panels. And he said he walked in, and he said when he walked in this 30-foot wide craft, he said, I could have taken a football and thrown it as hard as I could in any direction. I wouldn't hit a wall. It was that big on the inside. And then you start getting these stories where people say they can make the craft as big as they want inside, and they have crafts that are as big as the solar system, but these crafts may only appear to be 30 feet across. Inside, they can make it as big as they want, and you get this kind of stuff, and you start going like, "Wow, this is just unbelievable that this is going on," and it just gets weirder and weirder as you go along. Almost like I also study a lot of the quantum physics guys and the sort of reality. I'm sort of looking at what is reality rather than what is UFOs now. How does reality actually work? And David Bohm at one point talked about, he was a big physicist, involved with the atomic bomb and all this kind of stuff. And he said, this quantum physics stuff, he says, when we figure this whole thing out and get it all solved, he said, there's just another level below that. And that's the kind of thing where you start going like, maybe that's true. It's like peeling an onion, as you described. It gets weirder and weirder and bigger. And my sort of end result, and I'll leave it at this, my end result on what I think reality is that God did not create the heavens and the earth. God created the sparks of the divine, and we are creating the heavens and the earth, because consciousness is primary. Consciousness is primary. So we're the ones that are creating it. And what we do is we have eyes, ears, we have senses that bring in all this stuff from the sort of the quantum soup around us, and it comes into us. And then we do something, or we say something, and the world gets smarter and it gets bigger. And all we're doing is adding. It's like a movie. And now we're going to do our part of the movie, and somebody's watching the movie, and the movie gets more elaborate, and more characters come in, and more things happen. And we're just creating this thing. And so we come into the world, to do, as I say, you could just come in to have fun or whatever. But to me, a lot of it is you come in to make the world a better place, a more elaborate place than it was when you arrived.
Yes, man, I love that, and I can't wait to get into some of those deeper consciousness aspects. First, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. You're in Canada. How has the reaction been, first of all, amongst the people of Canada since all the revelations coming out of the U.S. government and the Pentagon and all these sudden interest in ufology from these mainstream sources? How is the people reacting, and how is the government reacting? Is it different than here in the United States that you've noticed? What's going on there?
Okay, interesting question. Basically, it's probably a little bit worse than in the United States. What I would say is that if you were to take a poll, and I've always tried to find these polls online, of the 100 most important issues to people, what's the UFOs wouldn't even make the top 100. People just aren't interested. They just don't know. And that's what I think one of the things we've got to realize. So I'm now doing some stuff where I'm trying to use hashtags that get me outside the little circle of UFOs and get me talking to other people about other stuff. And then you drop the UFO stuff. So we're in this little group where, it's maybe less than 1%. We think it's the greatest story in the world, and it is the greatest story in the world. But everybody else is taking their kids to soccer practice, and they're watching football games and hockey games, stuff like that. So in Canada, the really, if you talk to people on the street, they're aware of it. But they're really not interested. They're even my family, my son. I make sure that I get all my files to make sure that when I die that they go someplace where they get preserved, because my son has no interest. He just throw it in the garbage. He has no interest. And that's the thing. My first wife said she thought it was demonic. And I was like, whoa, I mean, where we're going from here? Like how do we solve this problem? And that's the thing. But the government is the interesting thing, because at one point there's a guy, his name is Larry McGuire. He's a member of parliament here in Manitoba. And we discovered that he was interested in the UFO phenomena. They asked for some stuff from me, from the member of parliament's aide, the guy that works for him. I sent them all the former files from the Canadian government in the 1950s, or Wilbur Smith, and all this kind of stuff. We had some correspondence back and forth. And then I heard that there was other members of parliament who hadn't come forward yet, who were interested in the subject. And so what I said is, maybe I can do this thing, because McGuire had been briefed by Lou Elizondo on the phone. Not really a briefing. Elizondo had gotten on the phone, and he had told this member of parliament, they're just asking questions. There's two members of parliament, and they're asking him questions, and Lou Elizondo was answering questions. So I said, what I would do is I would put a panel together, and I would get 4 experts from the UFO world. who could do the same thing, except this time we're going to do it live. We're going to do it on YouTube. We're going to multi-stream this thing. We're going to get 12 people to multi-stream it all at the same time. And so I got Lou Elizondo, I got Chris Mellon, I got Avi Loeb, and Gary Nolan. We're all going to be on this panel. And it was just going to be the same thing they'd done before, except it was going to be public. So I went to the member of parliament's aide, and he said, "Oh, that's exactly what we're thinking of doing." And I went, "Holy cow!" So I said, "Okay, I can get these guys." So then I went to these guys, and I said, "Well, can you do this panel?" And they all said, "Yeah, sure, we'll do this panel or whatever." And I said, we're going to multi-stream this thing, and we're going to make a big deal out of this thing. And the public would go, all these guys. And at that point, then I suddenly discovered that there was 10 members of parliament who were interested, that Maguire was actually briefing these people behind the scenes. And the way it works in the Canadian government is if you want something done by the government, what you do is you stand in the House of Commons. So it's like a parliamentary system. So they take question periods. So you can stand and the Prime Minister is there, and you can say to the Prime Minister, "What about UFOs? What are you doing about UFOs?" And you can do this publicly, and he has to give you an answer. And that's what I wanted Maguire to do, but he would never go into the House of Commons and make this public, display. But he was briefing these guys, these 10 guys behind the scenes, and what was going on in the United States, and what does this all mean, and the films, and all this kind of stuff. And so they were going to set it up, and so there's going to be these 10 guys, and they're just going to ask questions. There's going to be nothing. And so then suddenly, they said, oh, they didn't like the moderator. The Americans, on the panel, Sean Cahill was brought in, who works with Lou Elizondo, and he said, we don't like the moderator. And so then we didn't move the moderator. They showed up at the second meeting, and so I figured, oh, they're cool with the moderator now, and they weren't. It was Kurt Jamungal was going to be the moderator, and they were not cool with him. They didn't want him on being a moderator, and I just wanted like a thing where the guy's going to say, okay, this question, next question, and next question, because that's the way it works in the House of Commons. You ask the question, next guy asked the question. And then they had sort of agreed to the meeting, and then Chris Mellon was there, and we were trying to explain to the Americans that the Canadian system doesn't work the same. We don't have the three branches of government. We have one branch of government. We have the Prime Minister, and we have all the House of Commons. And if you have enough members in the House of Commons, then you get to say who's going to be the Prime Minister, and everything is controlled. So like where you have like what's going on with the disclosure movement there, you have the Senate and the House, and they have these committees like the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and they have power. They have power to do investigations and all this kind of stuff, and force the government to put out some money for a panel and all this kind of stuff. Whereas in Canada, the parliamentary committees don't have any power at all. They don't have any power to spend money or anything. And we kept trying to explain this to them. This is not how it works. And they said, well, you get the military witnesses, and then you get the military witnesses to say, oh, they had an engagement with the UFO, and they're inside Canadian airspace. And it was what I call the whole threat narrative. It was sort of like, oh, Canada's being attacked by these UFOs, or potentially being a threat for it's a national security. And then the national security committee forces the government to do something. I said, we can't do that. That's not how it works here. And we couldn't get it across to them. And then the way the Canadians wanted to do it was that they wanted us to provide cover. So this open thing where these member of parliament and all the Canadian people would go, holy cow, I didn't believe this guy was into UFOs, and this guy's into UFOs, and this guy. And it was from all three parties. It wasn't just one party. It was all three parties that were going to participate. And so they were doing this whole threat narrative. And we said, the Canadians, I don't want to talk on behalf of the Canadians, but basically the Canadians were saying, no, we don't want to do this. We want to do a scientific investigation. And the Canadian Prime Minister has a woman who's a science advisor. She's got an official position. She's sort of brought in as a science advisor to the Prime Minister. So she wanted to do a UFO investigation. But our public thing that was going to make this big deal about UFOs, all these parliamentary people were interested in UFOs, and she was going to use that and say, look, there's all these parliamentary people are interested. The Prime Minister should authorize money to do a UFO study, and she's a scientific. So we said we want to do a scientific investigation. It was at that point that Chris Mellon said, that's the poison pill, I'm gone. And the thing started to fall apart. And what it basically came down to is Sean Cahill had made this statement, we're not here to answer questions that you can look up on Google and we don't want to turn this thing into a spectacle. And I said, and it was like, yeah, that's what we do. We do want to turn this thing into a spectacle. And it was like, and the idea was like, if some parliamentary guy who doesn't know anything about UFOs asks a stupid question, what are you going to tell him? Shut up! I'm not going to answer your question because it's a stupid question. Of course, people who don't know anything about UFOs are going to answer stupid questions. So the whole thing fell apart, and they walked away. Elizondo was still ready to go. He wanted to come to the next meeting, but it was Cahill and Mellon, and they just basically shut it down. It was sort of like, we're not allowed to tell you what to do, but the attitude we got was, you're not allowed legally to tell us what to do, but you're not going to help us until we do what we're told. And that's what it was. And it all sort of broke down. So now Maguire has become public and has made this request to the government, not in the House of Commons. And a newspaper reporter has picked up on this and done a major article. So we're going to do some panels, and we're going to bring on this newspaper guy, and that's where we're going. But the Canadian thing, everybody's into hockey here. Everybody's into, the price of goods and stuff like that. And UFOs, it's like an interest thing. And that basically is one of the problems we've got in the UFO community. Is, I don't know if you've got all my books, but in the early days, I wrote a book called UFOs, MJ12, and Government Informants, or Area 51 and Government Informants. And in that one, we dealt with a guy by the name of Dr. Eric Walker, who was the former president of Penn State University. He was chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, where DARPA came from. He was on the board when they formed DARPA. They formed the JASONs, all this, high military think tank stuff. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was the co-developer of the homing torpedo. He's a very, very powerful guy. And he knew exactly what was going on. And we were pressuring him. There's a bunch of researchers. And I was sort of I wasn't doing the interviews, but I was just sort of, directing people who's going to ask him questions next. And they were all sending letters. And at one point he said, hey, you admit it. It's just curiosity. Why do you want to know about UFOs? Well, what's the deal? You're just curious. Admit it. You're just curious. And he said, why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity? And then he said something very important. He said, hey, so when you get the answer, what are you going to do with it? And now I ask those same questions to people who are, doing podcasts and stuff, because the answers are very important. And especially in the United States, I say, if you get the answer, are you actually going to allow reptilians, grays, and mantids to emigrate to the United States of America, to walk down the streets of the United States of America, to build businesses to compete against American businesses? Are you going to allow that? Absolutely not. It's going to be like, as Art Bell told me many years ago, we had this sort of argument. He said, I'll shoot them as they come off the ship. And it's sort of like, these more immigrants, but these immigrants can run a factory and build it in 2 weeks and don't have to pay for energy, and all their people are working for free. And it's like, what are you going to do when you get the answer? And Walker was basically right. For the vast majority of people in the UFO community, it's basically just curiosity. They just want to know.
I think it's very rightful curiosity, and I think that of course, that our government and military and dark factions know a lot more than they would ever be letting on. I mean, we've gone through, CIA and three-letter agency programs looking at things like telekinesis, psychic phenomena, remote viewing for a very long time. So, I mean, if we've been looking into things like that and we've known about UFOs for a while, they obviously know a lot more than they will ever let on. And right now, like you said, it's being painted as a threat factor, and I think that's basically so we can weaponize aspects of this so that we are the dominant ones in space and everything else, and that we have basically ultimate control over all this technology, right?
Yeah, and Jim Semivan, if you've listened to some of the interviews Jim Semivan has done in the last couple of months, he's about the most open guy. I think he's the best guy to listen to. And he basically talks about this. He said the committee that's now been formed, and he deals with them, he interacts with this committee that's been formed. He said they have the only interest they have is national security. And the reason they're going to, all this stuff's going to be classified. Like I sort of make a joke with people. I say, okay, so in the first report, when you got from this new committee, what did they say? Oh, we have 144 UFO sightings, and one we identified. And then everybody goes, well, what did it look like? Well, we can't tell you. It's classified. The shape is classified. Well, where's the reports? Oh, we can't tell you. It's classified. And all this stuff is being sucked into this black hole. of behind the scenes where they're using it for weapons. So I say it's the national insecurity budget, and they everything is a threat. Like you'll hear Lou Elizondo talk about, oh, the footprints. It could be, I mean, potential footprints. What have you got the footprints walking through your room? Well, what if it's Millab's? What if it's Lou Elizondo's footprints? I mean, it could be anything, and that's true. That in a military world, everything is a threat. And if it isn't a threat, you lose your job, because that's what you're there for. You're here, and it's like, what does every one-star general want? He wants to be a two-star general. That's what he thinks about being and he wants more people under him. He wants more, and so it just builds. That's why Eisenhower warned, beware the military-industrial congressional complex. They took the word congressional out of the speech, but congressional complex is once you get in the loop where you got money from Congress and it's going into the black budget, and they're playing this threat narrative, then you get this situation where you can't stop it. Where I give the example of the F-35 jet fighter that the Canadians are supposed to be buying, and I say, why would the Canadians want a strike fighter? I mean, it's a strike fighter. It's got a new defense. It's just going to be playing a role of dropping bombs on whoever the Americans say to drop the bombs on. And the F-35 is made in 46 different states, I believe. So why is it made in 46 different states? Because if there's a massive overrun, no senator is going to vote against it, because he's got jobs. He's got his hand in the cookie jar as well. He's getting money from it. So you wrap people into this whole thing. Everybody gets down the rabbit hole. And the way they see it, like the way Jim Semivan describes it, is the way I've described it over the years. And that is that if you are the guys that have the secret and you haven't figured it out, which is what a lot of people don't really realize, they haven't got a clue what's going on. It is in the Wilson leak document. I think you're familiar. I don't know if your people are familiar with that. But at the end of the Wilson leak document, it says, we have a craft and we think it'll fly. Now, that means clearly to me, we have a craft and we can't fly it. Now, why can they not fly this intact craft? They can't, because it needs a consciousness interface. You have to put your hand on a panel. You have to have the right consciousness to start this thing up. It's like putting your fingerprint on your cell phone to get your cell phone to open. It's that same sort of thing. You have the craft, but you can't. So as Eric Davis said, they had this technology. 1989, they put it on the shelf because they couldn't figure it out. It was called the core story. Jacques Vallée, Kit Green, and Hal Puthoff got together at a Denny's restaurant, and they've confirmed to me that the story's true. They went there and they had this story, and they said, well, we can't figure out what's going on. Like, it's a big mystery, and what do we know for sure? And these three top guys came to the conclusion, we are being interacted by some sort of intelligence. Number two, we have hardware. Number three, we can't figure it out. We're doing very poorly at the back engineering thing. So that's what people got to remember, is that because it has this consciousness thing, they can't figure it out. They know, because Tom DeLonge talked about it. When Tom DeLonge was in the skiff, he was in the Lockheed skiff. He told a story, I think, to George Knapp in 2016, just before his book came out, just after his book came out. And he said he was there, and he was telling this story about, he was in the room with this guy and the head scientist, and they were challenging him. He had a crazy conspiracy website, which I think is part of the reason they took him. He's just like, it was like a National Enquirer times 10, and on his website. And they were saying to him, well, what's this website you got? What's this conspiracy stuff? I mean, if you're serious about this, what are you putting this, what are you putting? And he's starting to explain it. And that's when Robert Weiss came out, and he said, I was just explaining, good thing you saved me. And so he never really did explain, but he said that the head scientist would say to him, so how did they get here? That's all I want to know. How does it work? How did they get here? And he had been hanging around with Stephen Greer. He broke off with Stephen Greer and went on his own. But at that time, he was hanging around with Stephen Greer. So he said, well, I think consciousness is involved. And he said, when the head scientist heard that, the head scientists at Lockheed said, now you're talking. And he said, it's all the guy wanted to talk about for 45 minutes. So they know that consciousness is involved, but they can't turn it on, which is the whole idea why they're following people around like Chris Bledsoe. There was a Ron Pandolfi, I don't know if you know, the CIA guy. He had made this statement, because we cannot control the phenomena, we watch those that the phenomena is interacting with. And that's how you got to do it. That's what I say. But what Jimmy Semivan says is that this new panel has no interest in that. They are not going down that road. All they're interested in is national security, which means that they're going to build it, and they're not going to give up any peace, because there's lots of bad people in the world. There's the North Korean guy, and there's the Chinese guy, and then there's the guy in Russia. And any little piece that can be prioritized, and they're going to grab it and they're going to use it against us. So we keep it secret until you have like a second generation. So they talk about like the Google Maps. Google Maps was always a military thing. But once they got into the second generation, then Clinton declassified it and put it into the public. So until they get it all solved, they say that they are not going to, because the Russians are working on it, the Chinese are working on it, and you have this military attitude, which is the way they think, is that everybody's out to get us, everybody's trying to steal our stuff, and we can't help them. We got to keep it all secret. We got to keep it classified. That's the only way we're going to keep it away from the Russians, and that's why the big secrecy, where they're trying to get out the non-classified aspects, but the actual how it works is still going to be classified. And that's what he said. Don't expect anything from this panel. They are not going to do a philosophical discussion about where the aliens are from. They don't care. And I said that a long time ago. They do not care where the beings are from, why they're here, what the message is. All they care about is how does this damn thing work? Or the Skinwalker Ranch. If you take a look at the events that took place with the OSAP, most people think the OSAP was a UFO program. It wasn't. It was a program where the head guy went to Skinwalker Ranch and he had this thing appear above Bigelow's head, behind Bigelow's head, this metal thing. And he was looking, and then he looked sideways and he looked back because he thought maybe he was hallucinating, and the thing was still there. And he's the DIA guy that authorized the program. And that's what they wanted. They wanted, how do you make stuff appear like that? How do you mutilate a cow when somebody's standing like 10 feet away and doesn't even know it happened? How do you put bulls in a trailer, which is probably the biggest thing they did, is the guy's bulls disappeared, and he went out and my bulls are gone. Like, what the hell? These real high priced expensive bulls. And then he looks over this trailer and he went, I wonder if they put him in the trailer. And then the trailer had a lock on. He takes the lock off, opens it up, and these things are stuffed in there like sardines. And they as soon as you open the door, they panicked and destroyed the trailer. And that's the kind of stuff they want. How do you put, or the special forces guys that had the orbs follow them home? And what happened there, and the part of the story they leave out of the Skinwalker book, was that when they were walking down that road, they heard a voice in their head. All three guys said, "Leave, you are not welcome." And then they got totally, they're so scared they won't even go back. And that's this reflective aspect. They were armed, they were hunting the Skinwalker, and the Skinwalker, it's reflective. So it says, oh, you want to play Hunt the Skinwalker? Oh, we'd love to play that game, and let's play the game, And they play the game, and so it's reflective, and that's what George Knapp said. Those that were the most aggressive to the phenomena had the worst experiences. And Brandon Fugel, who now owns Skinwalker Ranch, warns people this has a reflective nature to it. So do not come on if you've got in a bad mood. And he prays as they come in. When they come in the helicopter, he prays, and he realizes that it has this reflective quality. I even had another example, and I'll leave it at this, and you can ask the next question. I had a lot of people. I'm doing a thing on people are saying, oh, they get injured. So I'm doing a thing at the MUFON conference in Cincinnati on good versus evil. I'm going to deal with this thing. So one of the things was, someone said to me, oh, these people got injured in Georgia. And I said, well, what happened? They went inside this portal. This portal opened. They walked inside this portal. And I said, oh, were they armed? And they said, oh, yeah, we're all armed. And I said, well, why are you taking guns to a CE5? And they said, well, it's because there's rattlesnakes and there's this and there's different animals that could be there or whatever. And they're out in the wilderness or whatever. And so I said, well, were these guys armed when they went inside the portal? And they said, oh yeah, they're special forces guys. I said, thank you. Almost like the Rendlesham Forest thing. I always said in the Rendlesham Forest thing, I said, why did John Burroughs get injured and the other two guys that were standing right beside him didn't get injured? If this is a thing of radiation, they all should have got injured, the same as John Burroughs. John Burroughs is the only guy to get injured. And then when you hear the story that was told by Kabanzak, who was the guy beside John standing behind him, he said that when this thing flared up, Peniston yelled, open fire. John pulled his gun. The other two hit the ground. And he said, and Peniston and Kabanzak said, at that moment, John got hit with this beam of light. So it's the whole idea, as I always say, don't take a gun to a CE5. This thing has a very reflective nature. Or even like Michael Talbot, who wrote the book, the Holographic Universe. He was an experiencer, but he wrote this very famous book called The Holographic Universe. And he said that as a child, as a lot of experiencers have, he had the poltergeist experience. And he said when he was in a good mood, the poltergeist would hang his socks off the plants. When he was in a bad mood, he would wake up in the morning with cuts and needle marks in his arm.
I definitely want to get into the aspects of a lot of what we consider as paranormal activity has profound connections to this phenomenon, I believe. But I want to get into your book a bit, UFO Sky Pilots. Now, when writing this, were you surprised at how many people had actually had these experiences of being able to navigate and pilot a UFO?
I was absolutely shocked to my core that anybody would say this. It's like Valet says, this is absolutely absurd. I remember, see, what happened was I had to download in 2012, and I went to Phoenix to lecture for the big group there. And Stacy Wright, who runs the group, said to me, "Oh, you're still going to talk to Pam Dupuis?" And I had no idea what's the deal was. And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And she said, "Oh, that's good. She's coming to my house on Monday. You can meet with her." And so I'm at the house. Pam Dupuis comes with her partner, and she says, "What did Stacy tell you about me?" I said, "I don't know. I'm just supposed to talk to you." And she comes in, and as you said, there's all this other stuff is involved. So she's a remote viewer, and she was abducted when she was 3 years old. She was standing in the middle of the field with her diaper, and the UFO's flying away, and she's got all these abilities. She's remote viewing for the government and stuff, and all this psychic stuff. And I'm going, yeah, whatever. You listen to it, you've heard it before. And she's telling the story, whatever. And then she says to me, she says, "Oh, and last night I was flying the craft." And I never, it was like 39 years. I had never heard such a thing in my life. I was going to throw her out of the house. I could not believe it. It was like, okay, that's it. Like him. And I said, "Come on. They let you fly the craft?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, because all I could think in my head was Saudi Arabian women. Saudi Arabian women at that point were not allowed to drive a car unless there was a male on the car. And I'm going, "They let you fly the craft?" And she said, "Yeah, I've flown 3 different models." And then it was getting crazier and crazier as it go along. And I said, 3 models. I said, "Well, how do you fly a craft?" And she said, "Oh, you do it with your mind." And suddenly it's like, oh, that's why they wanted me to talk to this woman. And I went, "You do?" She said, "Oh, yeah." She at one point, I've actually got on my podcast. We had an interview she did. She was in hospice. She was dying of lung cancer at the time. And so she talked to us in hospice, and she told the whole story. I made her go through the whole story about where she'd flown, how she learned to fly the craft, and she was talking about this whole thing. And it's this whole. I'll give you the sort of the cliff notes of the thing, and basically what it is. And everybody's almost the same sort of thing. Everybody tells the same story. It's almost like you're reading off a cue card. And there was a couple of variations, but so it'll be like they go on the craft, or they find themselves on the craft. They don't see any abduction thing. They're on a craft, and they're standing in the middle of this craft. And the important thing that I've learned just yesterday, Jim Semivan said, when he was with the beings, he said, I remember he said, I was standing beside my wife, and I had this very, very strong feeling of some sort of guardian thing going on behind me. And these people will describe, and it wasn't until Jim Semivan detailed that I started to realize he may have explained to me what this was about, because the people on the craft were saying they were standing there and there was somebody behind them, but they didn't know whether they were humans or whether they were aliens. Now I'm saying, or they were guardian angels, because if you followed Michael Newton, the stories of Michael Newton, he did the 7,000 regressions that went back for the life between lives, where he let somebody die. He did 7,000, and then he'd take them through, and where are you going now? Where are you going? And just after you die, according to these 7,000 people, what you do is you go in front of a panel between 3 and 12 people, and you basically explain. It's like, how did it work out? Because you planned your life, and how do your life work out and stuff like that. And at that point, your spirit guide is with you, and it's behind you, I think on your left-hand side. So when Jim Semivan said, I had this that very strong feeling of this no, he didn't use angelic, but guide thing going on behind me, I'm thinking maybe that's what this is on. It's more of a spiritual thing on the craft, because it always comes down, is this really an abduction? There's an event, but what's actually going on is out of body experience. That is a spiritual event. Is it an abduction with aliens, or what is it? And this thing with somebody standing behind them, and so they were standing there. I'll give you the one. The guy was out of the Orange County group in California, and he didn't come to the lecture. He came after, when we were at the restaurant, and they said, David, you missed Grant's lecture. You tell him your story. And then David comes up and he says, "Oh, I think it was a dream." I said, "Yeah, a lot of people think it's a dream." I said, "So what was your dream?" He said, and then he said, "I was flying the craft." And I said, "Okay, can you tell me?" And he said, "Well, I think it was a dream." I said, "Well, everyone thinks it's a dream." And then they said, "Hey, David, tell him what you are." And then I said, "So what do you do?" And he said, "Oh, I'm a pilot." And I said, "You're a pilot." "Oh, my son's a pilot." I said, "My father was a pilot." I said, what do you fly?" And he starts telling me, and then he says F-16. I go, "F-16s? You've flown F-16s?" He said, "Yeah, I'm a U.S. Air Force retired colonel." I said, "Sit down and tell me your dream." So he sits down, and same thing. He's on the craft, and there's somebody behind him. He doesn't know whether it's humans or whether it's beings, and they say, "Okay, go ahead and do it." And he's standing there, and then he says, "I don't know what to do." And a lot of people describe the same thing. They're told to do it, and they say, "I don't know what to do." And then the voice behind him says, "Go ahead and do it. You know what to do." And he looks over at this panel, and he goes and he puts his hands on this panel. Got to remember, this is an F-16 guy, and he sits, and he said it was like suction cups on an F-16. I don't know what that means, but he said his hands are on the panel, and he said suddenly he's flying the craft. He's one with the craft, and people will describe you touch something. So this guy touched a panel. Chris Bledsoe touched a beehive type thing that was in the middle of on a pedestal in the middle of the craft. And the guy from Liverpool, England, put his hand on a panel on the wall. Or a lot of them talked about, even my assistant. At the very end, we're doing the book, and at the very end, my assistant Desta, who does all the editing and stuff like that, I'm talking to her, and then she says, "Oh, she was flying it." I said, "You were flying the craft too? Come on, you were flying the craft." And she said, "Yeah, I told you before. You didn't listen to me." I said, "Is that in the book? Come on, let's put the." And so it's in the book. I couldn't believe it. Even my assistant at the very end, I didn't even know. And it was these people were coming to me almost like synchronistically. They're not on the internet. I didn't find these things. They all came to me. They like people would come, and they would talk about it. So they would do the same thing. Like they touch a ball, they touch a panel, they would touch the panel or whatever. And he said suddenly he was flying the craft, and he said it was just like flying an F-16. And so he took one hand off the panel, and he was ready to put it back down because he figured the UFO was going to stall. And he put his hand up, and he said nothing happened. And so then he took the other hand off the panel, about 1 inch off, and he was getting ready to put it back down. And he said he had his hand off, and then he's standing with his hands like this, and he's flying the craft. And so the idea is the craft is alive. So whatever this is artificial intelligence. 1,000 years from now, or 5,000 years, this is what it's going to look like. What it is not that you take consciousness, because consciousness is primary. So consciousness makes matter. So you have a machine, and you're not going to put consciousness in it because consciousness is not a thing. Consciousness is everything. So it's consciousness. And the idea is it's biological. That's the thing we're missing in the machines. We're thinking we put consciousness in the machine. We're programming these machines, and it's just a loop. The only thing it'll put out is what you put in. But if you put biological material, if you can create a computer that's using biological material, then it'll grow. Then it can think. Then it can elaborate. And there's actually an experiment that was done, and I think I describe it in the book. It was done in southern Georgia. This is in the white world. So this guy took 20,000 neurons from a rat brain, and he put them in a petri dish, and he put these little electrodes below. And he said, he shows it on the camera, and you have these electrodes. You can see the little neurons, and they're sort of swimming around doing nothing or whatever. And he said, by the third day, they've formed a brain. They're all, you can see the links between them, and they're all talking to each other. All these things are talking. And so he puts these electrodes, and he wires these electrodes in, and he sends them a signal, and the brain will send an opposite signal back. So they take an F-22 Raptor jet fighter simulator, and they link it to this 20,000 neurons of a brain, and this thing flies. And you can actually if you look up F-22 rat brain, you'll see this video where they show and then they take the thing, they teach it how to fly. It's flying this F-22, and then they take the worst possible weather, real side winds and rain and all this kind of stuff, and the plane just keeps flying. It flies it right through the worst weather you can possibly think of. And that's what the artificial intelligence. So this is 2004. So you can imagine what they're doing in the black world. This is what it's about. It's the craft is going to be biological, and that's what people will say. The craft was alive. Some people actually gave it a name. There was Kathy Martin's assistant. Kathy Martin's assistant was talking to the power plant in this thing, and she said, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you. I mean, you're locked in, and you." He said, "No, don't worry about me. This is what I chose. There's no problem. This is what I chose to do." And this craft is in contact with all the other crafts flying around the solar system, around the universe. And so this is the idea. The craft is biological. That's what we're missing. So you make it more biological, and it thinks, and it gets trained or whatever. And it may be the same with the small grays, that this is biological as well, that they're able to make these small beings biological. But it's not the computer. It's the biological thing. It's the when you get biological material, it'll grow, and it'll think, and it's able to do this kind of stuff. So this is what people say: the craft is alive. You become one with the craft. As soon as you touch the craft, you become one with the craft. It's like you and the craft are the same thing. And whatever you think is what the craft thinks. And what the people are told when they ask them, where would you like to go? Often they'd say, where would you like to go? And like one guy is Ron Johnson out of Utah, big experiencer guy who's had 50 years of experience. And he said, I would like to see the Milky Way from a distance. And they said, this will take about 1 second. It's going to be a very heavy G force. And then they said to him the key words. They said, it's within you. Go there. And they all say it's inside you. Go there, almost like the remote viewing. Where's a remote viewer go? Does he actually go out there, or does he go inside his mind and everything's inside his mind? Because when the remote viewer is the same thing. When the remote viewer, when you give them the target 673-476, the remote viewer says, I'm at the target, like that. They don't say, I'm flying to the target. I'll be there in a minute. Yeah, they're right at the target instantaneously. It's a non-local thing. There is no time and space. And that's what Ron said. In 1 second, he said it was like, it's almost like you take the pages of a book and you sort of riff through them. You go as they were going. He thought it was like dimensions. They were going through, and he said, "Boom!" He looked out the front window, and there was the Milky Way off in a distance. So I say I estimate 50 to 70,000 light years in 1 second. He went. If that's true, if that story is true, we got something wrong with time and space, our understanding of time and space, and that's what people describe. You become one with the craft, and whatever you think is where you go. So people can say, I want to go to the far side of the galaxy. They're instantaneously there. They go there. And that seems to be what I was, when I followed the government research, it always fell apart when it came to anti-gravity, that they weren't getting anywhere. They had a little bit, they could reduce it by 1 or 2%. But when it came to the portal thing, then it appeared the government may have portal technology. They may have this jump room technology. In fact, I had and I'll leave it at this, and you can ask another question. I had a meeting with the famous Tyler D from American Cosmic in 2013, and I'll use his name. His name is Tim Taylor. It's there was no secret when I met him, and he was showing me these. He said to me, I had a number of conversations, very informative conversations with him, but he said to me, he said, what do you think of this? And he shows me a cell phone. And he shows me this photograph of these two guys, and there's a painting of these two guys flying through space. And the one looked like he's older than the other, and looked like they're wearing pajamas. And I go, yeah, I don't know. And then he shows me the next photo, and it was a picture of these three photos together where it was an eclipse as the eclipse went along. And the third one was all these balls, big balls going into to these little tiny balls, like big balls, smaller as you went towards the middle of it. And I go, I don't know, Tim. I mean, I don't know. And then he shows me this car. He says he's a 56 Chevy or 57 Chevy. It was on top of the parkade of this building. And he said in the back seat, he said on the postcard, it said, oh, it was like some guy talking to his girlfriend or something. I wish I could move through time and space to be with you, or something it was something like that. And I go, really? That's what it said? That's what it said? And then he says, hey, you know where it is? You know where this is? I go, nah, Tim, I have no idea where this is. He says, the Hughes Aircraft Building. And it said, the Hughes Aircraft Building. I still don't know what you're talking about. He said, that's where the jump room was. And I went, really? Those pictures. And then he says, show me it again. I look at these pictures again, and I'm trying to figure it again. And he said, the one with the two guys flying through space is right outside the elevator where this supposed jump room was. And I'm thinking to myself, and it didn't click. Like a lot of these things don't click at the time. It was like years later. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm going, why did Tim show me those photos? Like, why would he show me this? Because I went to LAX. The first time I got to LA, first thing I did, I went to LAX. I went to this place and I photographed these paintings. And I'm looking around, and I actually contacted the guy that claimed the jump room. I said, were you in the elevator in the first building or second building? Because it's 999 Sepulveda Avenue in LA, and there's two buildings. They've been turned into office buildings. And I said, were you in the front building or the back building? He said, I don't remember. I was a little kid when we were doing this stuff. And so when I got that, then I'm thinking to myself, it was sort of so that Tim went there. Why would he go there if there's nothing to it? Why would this high-level NASA guy go to the Hughes Aircraft Building? So that's that kind of stuff that all seemed to back up. That the more I looked at this, and I just put all these accounts together of these 36 people describing this fact that the reason we're not getting anywhere is this consciousness technology and what this whole thing may be about. These people, and they may not be going to other planets, or maybe they are going to other planets, but they're doing this because they're trying to break this this nuts and bolts thing. They're trying to reinforce this consciousness thing. They're teaching people to levitate stuff. Why are they teaching people to levitate stuff? They'll tell the story and then they'll die or whatever. But this is gradually changing consciousness, where I tell these stories and you hear more of these stories about consciousness. People start talking about it, and it breaks that thing, almost like 2017 when the New York Times article came out. Everybody went, yeah, okay, I knew about that. And then it just leads to the next question. Then everybody says, hey, so what about the bodies? What about crafts and stuff? And that they're leading us down this sort of road where people are accustomed to the idea.
Now, you mentioned earlier how in some of these cases they may see a ship in the sky and it's maybe 30 feet wide, and then the next thing they know, they're inside this thing and it's massive and it's much larger than it ever looked on the outside. And you also mentioned that this being a consciousness experience, that it's most likely people having these experiences are not being taken externally, outwardly, physically to space, but they're going within themselves, and they're having these experiences, and there is some sort of reality or super spectrum that surrounds us at all time, but it's also inside of us and it's everywhere, and it's, like we were saying, super hard to understand. But this is actually what we're accessing when we're having these experiences, right?
Yeah. In fact, you get, I show the crossovers between different types of experiences. And the one that's the most impressive is the one with near-death experience. So in near-death experiences, people that come back, 31% of them, according to the survey, it was done by the near-death experience people, said they knew the answer to everything in the universe. In the UFO experience world, it's 40%. 40% of people who have had experiences will say, at one point during my experience, I knew the answer to everything in the universe. And I've had a couple of them, and I challenge them. I always use the same question. I say, hey, so how do you know that? And how do you know there wasn't something like number 7, 8, or 9 on the far side of the universe they forgot to tell you about? And they say exactly what I said about it. And I said right at the beginning of the interview, it's this idea, like, I'm not sure, I just know. I knew when I got that consciousness thing, this is right. And so they said, I know I knew everything in the universe. So that's the whole idea. If they knew everything in the universe, then the beings have access to everything in the universe. So they're not here to study us, to figure out how the plants grow or, stuff like this. They know everything. They've got access to everything in the universe. And they brought us in there. And then as the people will say, when I go back, I'm going to remember everything. I'm going to remember. And they say, no, you won't remember. You won't remember. And as they go back, they said, it's almost like a dream. It goes down. And all they can remember is that they knew everything in the universe. They can't remember anything, any of the details. And so that's the whole thing. It's all within you. And that's this idea of the contact modalities, that you go within yourself. And the prime example that give you an analogy that maybe help people understand how this works. So people think consciousness is in the brain. You're looking out your eyes, you're feeling and stuff and there's some sort of movie screen or in your head and stuff like that. It's like I always say to people, like, where's the actual image taking place? Like, and if I say to you, like, who's your first girlfriend, and then a name pops in your head, like, what do you think? Neurons went running up to the 3rd floor and went down to the filing cabinet, girlfriends, hang on. No, it's instantaneous. And like, where's this happening? And so with now I've lost my train of thought with this. What we were discussing?
We were talking about how this is a field that surrounds us at all time. We're accessing this from inside ourselves. Yeah.
Okay. So I've studied a lot with out-of-body experiences. I tried to do it. I couldn't do it. But the out-of-body, and a lot of the UFO experiences will say it's actually out-of-body. They're actually, there's a guy that runs MUFA in Japan who says it's actual out-of-body. Every single case, he had 22 that he did an experiment, and 22 is dealing with the Greys, who's in the ship and all this kind of stuff, and it was all out-of-body experience. So we have this impression that consciousness is in the brain, but when you have an out-of-body experience, so you have the out-of-body experience, you're leaving your body, you look back at your body and you see your head, and you see your head, and you go, consciousness is not in the brain. Because there's my brain. I can see my brain, and my consciousness is here. It's up here. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is, what's really going on? The body is inside the consciousness, because you're looking at it. The body's inside your consciousness. Your consciousness, and then your consciousness can go and look out the window, and the consciousness can see the stars and the planets, and it can the stars and the planets are in my consciousness as well. And you can actually go for a trip like Ingo Swann did when he did the remote viewing. Go to Jupiter. Oh, I'm at Jupiter, and he sees the rings, and then years later they confirm there's actual rings around Jupiter, which they didn't know. Instead, you can go wherever you want, and that's the idea, that it may all be inside yourself. You've got the answer to everything, and that's where this thing with contact modalities is that there's ways that you can do to break into that thing. And you may not want a near-death experience going through the front windshield, to get your out-of-body experience and learn this thing. But there are ways to do it. And everybody has these false impressions that consciousness is in the head and that it's all physical nuts and bolts. And so I remind people that, you can, you believe things. People say, no, I believe, I have I know what I see. But in 1492, the world was flat. I mean, it's simple. It was flat. I mean, everybody thought it was flat, and it looks like it's flat. The sun goes around the earth, and we still say the sun rises, the sun sets. We still have this idea the sun's going around the earth, and we believe we're at the center of the universe. And a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the stuff that we believe is we've only believed for 100 years. For example, when Einstein and Bohr and Planck and all these guys were around, they believed there was only one galaxy. It wasn't until 1925 there was a big debate between Shapley and Hubble about a big trial thing where they were arguing, a big debate as to whether there's more than one galaxy. And Hubble had discovered what he called Andromeda. He said, I found another galaxy. And Shapley, who was the authority in the world on cosmology and astronomy, said, this is garbage. This is a gas cloud inside the Milky Way. And so 1925, it wasn't until then that it broke and people conceded, there was more than one galaxy. Now it's like there's 2 trillion galaxies. And in the idea of the atom, until 1911, we believed the atom was a solid thing and it had electrons embedded into it like a pudding. And we don't realize that the stuff that we know, we only know because we believe it, and that most of it, as they described to me, not only is what you got wrong, it's exactly the opposite, and you haven't got a clue. I can't remember what they said. It was very, very sort of, you think you understand what's going on there. I can't remember how they phrased it, but you haven't got a clue. They just hammered this all the time about this ego thing. You think, and that it almost sort of set me up. Because I kept saying, I don't think I got a big ego. I mean, but they just kept hammering away. And it was almost maybe this thing where they were getting me ready for this idea where you have to accept all these really, really bizarre things and go down that road. Because that's what people will do. They'll block it off and they'll say, I don't want to deal with that. They'll deal with so much. But when it gets over there, even I had an interview the other night, and this guy had been interviewed by him lots of times. And as soon as it got to orbs, he said, well, you're doing orbs. I don't know. And it's like, that was the road too far. And so I'm describing to him, this is another pattern. There's definitely a pattern in here that you can see it. This happens, and this happens, this happens, this happens, and certain people and stuff like that. Nope. It's just, you could tell it was too far for me. Or when I did the consciousness thing, Jerry Pippin, who was one of the biggest interviewers at the time, said, Grant, I can't believe you've done this. You were the president guy. You were the guy that was doing the presidents with the documents. And now you've gone over to this woo-woo stuff. And I said, well, Jerry, I didn't really go over there. I kind of got teleported there. And so that's what a lot of times it happens is when you have these download experiences, it sort of takes you and it slams you across the head, and you suddenly get the experience. And once you've had the experience, you know for sure. So the people will say, I know, like science will always want to try to argue with you. They'll say, you just believe your stuff is anecdotal and we know. No, you're doing the experiments. You've got theories. We're the ones that know. The people who have the experience, you're the believers. You're the guys that believe. We're the ones that know. You can only know by actually having the experience. Then you know for sure.
Yes, 100%. And that's what I want to close on today and get into is this sense of knowing and how personal these experiences really are for people. It seems like the most genuine experiences are not being had with groups of people. They are occurring on an individual basis, like we said, through people's own out-of-body or astral or consciousness experiences. And between the last time we spoke and now, I had my first what I would consider contact experience through a meditative session. And since then, I've had plenty other experiences, not only through meditation, but like you said earlier, through psychedelics, through high doses, and very profound experiences of not only knowing, but making contact with whatever this intelligence or these intelligences are. And one of the first most profound things that I was directed to do to get a better understanding was heal my own childhood traumas and take care of things that were weighing on my consciousness and heal all these past events and traumas. And then eventually, as I started to work on myself and do these things, I did gain a better understanding of what I could possibly be dealing with. And I think that this phenomena is occurring on an individual basis, and seemingly for more and more people, or at least more and more people have the courage to come out and talk about it now. Are you seeing more of this in the past few years, more of these people kind of having these profound experiences and actually coming out and talking about them?
Well, I can't really tell whether they're coming out to talk about them, but I'm running into them. So it's like sort of like you, is where you start doing interviews and then you realize this, and then you meet another person, and I'm sort of moving into the field where these people are sort of coming, and I make it sort of public for them, not public, but I make it available for people. And I used to run a group called Experiences Anonymous. And I based it off AA because I had a lot of contacts with people who were in AA and stuff like that. And I worked it on the same principle, is that people will come in and they have these experiences and they really don't know, I still think it's a dream and stuff like that. And it's very troubling. And I still can't get over the sexual stuff they did at the very beginning. And now it's good, but, and they're all troubled with this kind of stuff. And you put them in an environment where I had a group where we actually suspended one guy because we'd go into the group and then he would say to someone, "Hey, what's your story? Like, what are you doing here? Like, what do you?" And say, "Albert, like, forget it. You can't do this. I warned you." And he kept doing it. And so we basically cut him out, because you want to have an environment where people can come into a group meeting and there can be like 30 people and everybody just talks, and then people talk. It's like, hey, they talk. And then some guy sitting in the back of the room with his arms folded, no, this ain't me. I don't, it's not me. I'm not crazy like these people or whatever. And then somebody will tell their story. And they'll sort of sit forward, and it's like, oh my God, I am one of these people. And that's what you want, is you want the ability where people can open up. So I had this group, and now I think there's 1,000 people in it, and they've gone more to UFOs now, to sort of it started as this thing for experiencers. And I still sort of run where experiencers will come to me because they know my main focus is that if you want to understand the UFO phenomena, you don't want to look at the lights in the sky. That'll just tell you something's going on. You got to talk to the people who are interacting with this phenomena. And the more I look at the phenomena, the more I see it as not a UFO phenomenon, an ET phenomenon. It looks more complex. It looks like it's all working as one thing. And it has this aspect where, like yours, where you clean up your life and you got these personal things going on. And it's more like a personal experience where people are learning things. And that's where the thing where when I heard this thing about Jim Semivan said, there was this I can't remember how he termed it. Didn't use angel, but this sort of guide thing going on behind me. And that's this thing about the guide, that you have these guides that are helping you, and you come into the world and you say, I'm going to work on this, I'm going to work on that, I got this problem, and that you set up your own problems. You set up your own childhood experiences to test yourself, to have things to work on, and you overcome it through later stuff, and you get over it, and then your next life you start something else. And according to Michael Newton, at the 7,000 people, when they all come to the end, they all say the same thing. They get asked, how did it work out by these higher beings, and everybody says the same thing. Oh, I could have done better. I was going to do this, but I forgot. And I was going to do this, but I got scared. No, I didn't do that. And there's like all the things that they didn't do. And I'm going to do it next lifetime. I'm going to work on it next lifetime. And so we have to realize that the more I look at it, the more it looks like a spiritual experience to me. That this is all like a big play. And now we're in outer space. So now it's aliens. Because people don't realize, I've been in this a long time, people don't realize this thing is morphed. And John Alexander says this thing morphs. When they were at Skinwalker Ranch, they said not only did the phenomena know what they were doing, it knew what they were going to do, and it would change. So they would do something, they'd say, oh, it's doing this. And so they would set up all the cameras, and then it would do something else off the cameras. And then they'd go set the cameras over there. And it was one step ahead of them all the time. They said this. It was sort of like they was playing this game with them. And when Bigelow was asked, they said, what was it all about? What was the whole thing about? all this stuff going on at the ranch. And he said instantly, without even thinking, he said messaging. It's all about messaging. It's all about messaging and games. They're playing games with us and sending messages. And Jim Semivan says the same thing. They come to us and they talk in symbols. And he gets all upset about this. Like, why don't they just tell us what's going on and stuff? Because that's what it's about. It's not about, you doing your kids' homework. It's about setting up these little things. And you may even be working with the beings. You may have come in, and even Chris Bledsoe, when they asked him in the regression, they said, when did you first meet the beings? And he said, they've been with me since before I was born. So there may be this thing where this thing where Jim Semivan talks about this spirit guide thing behind him when the aliens are there, and he's really, I'm offended. My human rights was violated. My wife was injured. I'm really pissed off at these guys. He has no love for these beings that he interacted with. And yet he says there was this guardian thing going on behind him. And that indicates that it may be this whole thing. There's a guardian angel and it's a play, and you're doing this thing and you're being guided, and it's just a play. And most people don't realize that. They think they are the actor on stage. And I say, because you were King Henry VIII in high school does not mean you're now King Henry VIII. You're not. You were played King Henry VIII. Get over it. You're not King Henry VIII. You're on stage. And that's what's going on with us. We come here, we play the play. We are not the actor on the stage. We are playing an actor on the stage. When it's all over, the I leaves stage left and the actor dies. And so you got to realize that almost all metaphysical literature has two themes. One is the idea of oneness. You're all one. And the other one is remember who you actually are. You are this individual that is eternal, that moves, or you go from life to life. And so we may be working with the beings. People say, oh, there's evil. The Greys, they're evil. And I say, oh, okay. So if they're evil, what happens if you die and you're born tomorrow and you suddenly find out you're a Grey? Are you now evil? It's like this crazy idea that there's evil races and stuff like that. And so we got to realize that whatever we're against, we could end up playing. If you're against some sort of race, you may come back as that race to learn empathy and understanding. And it's all one. We're all connected. We're all, alive. Or as the psychedelic people say, everything's conscious, alive, and connected. And that's what we have to remember. And we are not the actor on the stage. We are playing this actor. And then things start to sort of make sense as to what's going on or what may be going on here. And the more I look at it, the more it looks like it was in the 1890s. There were wooden ships. People don't forget this. There was wooden ships that were flying around and guys hanging off for ropes. And when the thing, you remember the story about the crash. There was this crash in Texas where this UFO crashes in 1895 and they bury the body. You've heard the story, whatever. When in the original report, the UFO, you know how fast it was moving when it hit this windmill? 7 to 10 miles an hour. Like now, that was totally crazy. Like it fell apart and they already died. Like, come on. And so it was like that. And then it was like the Foo Fighters. So then it changes from these wooden ships in World War II, it's Foo Fighters. And then after World War II, it was these green fireballs. Then these discs appear with the balls underneath them. And there's goofy looking 1950 flying saucers. Then there was 1950 flying saucers. Then there was triangles. And people could say they were always around. I say they really increased in the 1970s and the 80s. And then you have the orbs came in. You have people with light language came in. You have the crop circle started in 1982. You have the cattle mutilation started in 1967. They didn't go on forever. The ground traces that were going on when I was doing the research in the 1970s, they haven't done for 25 years. You know, where the UFO comes down, it burns out the grass and leaves the pod marks. Hasn't happened for 25 years. They're past that. Change it. We're going to do crop circles now. Now we're going to do orbs. And I call it the theory of wow. They just want you to go, wow, what the hell's going on here? Like, and they just keep doing one thing after another. Or I tell people, if you think that this all makes sense, you just take a look at the Nimitz thing. And this is absolutely confirms it. You take the Nimitz thing. Why did the UFO drop from 89,000 feet or 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second? I mean, is this an abduction maneuver? Or did they run out of gas? Or, like, how could you move that fast and stuff? 44,000 Gs, apparently it was. Why did they do that? They wanted everybody to go, how the hell did they do that? And the UFO's going, watch. We're going to show off. Yeah, what? That's how fast we can go. And everybody goes, oh my God. And or they complained about the threat. All these orbs coming near the planes, and they would come within a couple of feet of the planes, and they were like round orbs with these sort of boxes inside them, and they came so close and it was a threat to the plane. I can just see Zogar say, hey Zogar, I bet you I can get closer to the plane than you can. And they're just showing off. They're just doing this weird thing. Or why do UFOs have lights on them? You have UFOs have lights on them so you can see them. if you didn't see them, there would be no experience. They want you to see the UFO, and all UFOs are different. Almost every UFO is different. Almost every UFO experience is different, and they just have the lights. It's almost like grade one in some alien school. We got to get these people's attention on this planet. They're ready to destroy the planet, and they're all off. What can we do for lessons? And the grade one says, "Hey, let's put lights on planes and fly them, or UFOs and fly them around." And the grade two says, "Hey, let's do crop circles." Okay, you do crop circles. And grade three says, "Oh, let's mutilate cattle in the areas where the nuclear power stuff was going on." Okay, let's do that. And then and you go through this thing, and it's almost like they're doing this thing where they're doing these various things, and everybody's going, "Whoa, whoa!" And the more we talk about it, the more it gets this 19. Just say 5 years ago, where the New York Times article comes out, where everybody's acclimatized. Because I wrote an article years ago called "The 64 Reasons They Decided to Tell You the Truth." And Stephen Greer was talking about this thing where the stock market will melt down. People will think oil's not worth anything. The stock market will melt down. People are going to commit suicide. The religious people are all going to be offended. None of that happened. Nobody committed suicide. Everybody said, "Yeah, so what?" And then was the next question. And they're moving this consciousness up, but they're doing it by changing things. They're talking in 1890, when they said to them in the 1890s, they said, "Where are you from?" They said, "Oh, we're from above the clouds. We're from Mars." And then in 1890, we had discovered the canals on Mars with telescopes. So it was a big discussion in the 1890s. And so you see this, it changes from one thing and it goes to another, and it gets a little more complex. Then they introduce the consciousness thing. They drag me in, and we all may be playing a play where you and I and a bunch of people all got together before we were born. And we said, "Okay, you do this, you do this. We're going to meet up. I'm going to do an interview on your show," and this sort of thing. And we're all planning this stuff to move this consciousness down the road. And some other people may be doing something else in sports or whatever they're doing, or peace or whatever. And this was our mission. So that's why I say to people, it really doesn't matter. If you believe in reincarnation, which was the thing they said to me, if it's one world, that's one thing. But if it's multiple worlds, everything changes. So if it's multiple worlds, then you and I came into this world, and we probably came in here to do something. It was not a crapshoot. We said, we want to do this. We want to have this play. We want to, work on this and raise this, or get over this problem of love, or whatever it is. And so we come into the world, we plan to do something. And when we leave, we get asked only one question: how did it work out? Because we put the players on the stage, we arranged it all, and we either did it or we didn't do it. So all we have to do is wonder what are we came here to do, and are we doing it? And that's all that matters. So what everybody else is doing doesn't really matter, because they're not going to say, I can't bring up, "Oh, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton," and they're going to go, time out. "Oh, I don't want to hear about your mother-in-law. I don't want to hear about the dog ate your homework. You planned this. How did it work out for you?" You can't bring in somebody else. You can't be a victim when it's all over, because we are in control of our lives, and that's what we have to realize. And so all we worry about is, why are we here, and what are we supposed to be doing, and are we doing it?
I love it, man. That's a beautiful note to end on. Mr. Cameron, thank you so much. Before you head out, let everyone know what's the best way to find your books, social media, all the good stuff you got.
Okay, my publishing company is called It's All Connected, and that's one word, It's All Connected Publishing. And you can put that with Grant Cameron and find all the books that I've written. And my assistant is a channeler. She's got a couple of really interesting books on there. And basically where I put most of my stuff, you can find me at Presidential UFO is my handle on Facebook. Most of my stuff I get published there, and links to what I'm doing. And my next book is going to be on apports and manifestations. It's called Weird: The World of Apports and Manifestation. That's the whole phenomena of things appearing, dropping out of ceilings, people making things appear, disappear, stuff appearing in experiencer's house, reappearing 3 or 4 years later in another place. Just a very, very weird thing. And again, there's a very great pattern to this. And the one guy who's the expert on it said to me, "I'm glad somebody's finally writing a book on this." So we've got all these things that appeared, and I go into the metals. I go into the metals from which I say they're dropping. And I talked to Jacques Vallée. I said, "Jacques, does it make any sense? Come on, Jacques. They come across the galaxy, and they avoid stars and planets and black holes and stuff, and they get here, and then these little pieces start falling off the flying saucer. Come on, they're dropping this stuff." And I said, "They're gifting this stuff." And Jacques said, "I think I came up with that term." So he fully agrees. And so I look at the metals. I look at the metals that I've got that have dropped around, and I go through this whole thing that this is stuff that they're dropping. It's called Tim Taylor called it the gifting field. He had a field in New Mexico where he took Diana Pasulka and John and Gary Nolan and for the metal there, and it's called the gifting field. They actually believe the crafts are being given to us. They're dropping the stuff on purpose, all the metals. So I go in this next book, Weird, I talk about the metals and my experience with it's been going on for many years.
Excellent. We'll definitely have to have you back on to talk about that one. This was excellent. Mr. Cameron, thank you so much for coming on.
Super.
And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will be talking again tomorrow, and we'll see y'all then.